I've tried the office space, but I found that I'm almost only Slack only people so much that kind of disruptive.
Okay.
Wow. Ready for yeah, I would have been fired already.
Well, it's not Wednesday, June 20th. So
We just connected that.
I didn't yet. Thanks. Yeah, it's probably good to figure out if you can.
what's the matter?
Weird. I should when to
How are you doing?
stream. Like,
Lovely.
Whenever.
You're on this coast again?
it's okay. Usually when we go up there, we spend like, oh, here's 5 minutes.
Yeah, well, everybody needs like a bathroom break and beer and all that jazz anywho, so it works out.
Do you go down there?
Yeah, I got my website.
Nice. That's great. Yeah, they have meetups there.
Keith, thank you for manning the door.
Ben's down there now. We're still filtering in. But
Okay, I put a message on the meetup group as well to tell people that like if they go there and there's a locked door that to message us on Meetup, and I'll try to keep an eye on my emails.
awesome.
So.
Yeah,
Way nicer than me. I would have said you should have been here on time.
Aww.
What
if?
I know, that's why I said you're nicer than me.
Oh yeah. Who's gonna bike?
I just was chronically late to Meetup all the time until I was running one. So.
I feel like
I can't be chronically late.
do you want me to move? Is there a
Do you have a room? No. Okay. Is that your time?
All right, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to tonight's meetup. I think I see some people who I think are new. So just to introduce myself, I'm Jen. I'm on the Ember Learning team, and I'm one of the many people who helps make this meetup possible. So thank you for joining us tonight. We are going to have 3 different speakers, so hopefully there should be something that everyone here can take away from tonight's talks. Tom is going to be speaking about how he refactored his app 3 times.
Built it
From scratch 3 times.
Burned it down twice.
Nice. So we can all learn from that experience, hopefully. Savannah is going to tell us about Ember Animated, which some of you have may have heard Ed's EmberConf talk about that library, so she's going to share some more details for that. And Ed is going to tell us all about auto import, which is the hot new way to add dependencies to your Ember app more easily. Before we get into those, we do have a code of conduct. It's the same as the general Ember code of conduct, and we can summarize it as saying, be the person Mr. Rogers wants you to be. If you ever have any problems, you can always email organizers at Boston Ember.js. That goes to me and a couple other people who help run this meetup. And then there's the larger Ember email as well. So this meetup is possible in part thanks to our host tonight. Keith, I'm looking at you. Do you want to talk?
Yeah.
Keith's going to tell us about Salsify.
I'll give a little 1-minute spiel, not even that. So we're Salsify. We're building the best product experience management platform in the universe. I want to brag a little bit because we just hit a couple of really cool milestones. We just raised our Series D round of funding for $43 million.
Dang. I feel like that's
we are outgrowing this space, and we're actually moving into a new office next Wednesday, which is going to be way bigger and cooler. We are growing the platform and growing the engineering team, and we're hiring more to do that. So if you're interested, talk to me or anybody else who works at Salsify. Raise your hand, guys. Yeah. Talk to these people. And I'd love to tell you about all of the cool things we're building. Can't get into that right now, but talk to any one of us during or after the meetup.
Thanks.
Thank you.
And they help us with the space. They help us with pizza and beverages of many different sorts. So round of applause. Thank you, Salsify. If you're new to this group or new to Ember, there's a couple things you should know. These are the ways to get in touch and to stay up to date with this meetup. So there's an Ember community Slack organization, and we have a Boston channel on that. We're on Twitter. There's a weekly newsletter that's put out by the learning team, and then there's weekly newsletters by other people in the community. So this is a good way if you're just starting to learn this stuff to get notifications about some good resources. At the end of the talks tonight, if we have time, we'll do a section called Ask Ember Boston. And what that is anyone who has a question about Ember or front-end web development or something like that, and they want to do a little bit of brainstorming and ask the group, you can come bring up your question and then spin off side conversations, or we can all talk together so we can learn something new. Let's see. There's a bunch of JavaScript and Ember conferences coming up. Out of curiosity, is anyone going to Ember camp?
Chicago? Chicago.
Nice. I'll see you guys there.
Yeah.
And then there's Amsterdam, which is
They really should have called it that.
I know. I'm kind of disappointed that I suggested it and then nothing happened. Ember Fest. Is anyone going to that?
I lost it.
Ooh. Okay. Does anyone have any jobs available they want to talk about that's not Salsify? Since we know. No. Okay. All right. Our next meetup is going to be August 22nd. It's kind of an unusual one. It'll be out at Shift Analytics in Waltham, and I'll be running an intro to open source contributions workshop out there. So it's a bit of a hike. I will have to drive. There's no way around it. And my car holds, let's see, I'll pretend my husband's coming. So 3 more people. I can have 3 more people in that car. So if you want to hitch a ride, let me know, and we can go head out there. I'm also looking for people who are willing to help shepherd the, some people who are making their first open source contribution. They might have questions. They might need to debug a Git thing. Maybe they forgot to fork the repository. So if anyone is able to volunteer and help, that would be awesome. Please shoot me a message on Slack or email or whatever. Any other announcements before we get going? Yeah.
You said JavaScript conferences, you mentioned a bunch of Ember ones. There was some.
I did mention Ember ones. Yeah, there are general ones. JavaScript Hawaii, or sorry, JSConf US or something. I don't know. One of those ones. There's one in Hawaii, and the CFP is just opened up. So if you want to give a talk, going and doing that in Hawaii, it's pretty great, right? And I want you to live your best life. So if you need someone to help you proofread your proposal, you can send it to me. And there's a whole bunch of other people in this room who have those skills as well. So that's one.
It actually closes in a few days.
It closes in a few days?
Yeah, it's not. I think. Maybe,
did it just open yesterday?
Maybe you just heard about it. I think it closes.
Open until August 10th. It says.
Move fast.
Friday.
Move fast. I guess I was late to the party. Also.
And it's February when it's held. February.
Oh, what a nice.
You still got 1 day to get it in the last 24 hours.
Yeah. That's when most proposals come in.
By a huge
I'm not joking. I have data to back that up. There's also, I'll be speaking at All Things Open in Raleigh in October. I'm told that is an amazing conference. I haven't been there myself yet. It's enormous. Tons of people. Does anyone else know of other ones?
Something that follows up Ember Camp Chicago. The next day there's a Chicago JS campus camp.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Which I will not be at the parking meeting at. But who are doing that?
Cool.
JS camp.
There we go, JS.
And if you think there's nothing that you would be qualified to talk about, that's incorrect. So just talk to someone and we can do some brainstorming. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Tom, who's going to tell us about rewriting an app from scratch 3 times. So we'll give you a minute to set up here. I should have done that while you were.
I think I just press a Q button.
All right. I will end my screen share. And then I believe you plug this in first and then do the screen share. Which adapter do you need?
This one? Not.
Let me see. Turn this side. Oh, good. You're good.
Not a DevOps person.
You still have that. Is it muted? Why is it echoing? That doesn't make any sense. Oh. I don't understand. I don't see your screen share. So over here.
When you
Like
plug
that.
in a new screen, it turns
This is an alert.
Screen sharing?
Okay, and then go to your tab. And I think you should begin. Okay, we're good. And this is unmuted. Yes. All right, can we get a round of applause for Tom? Tom, take it away.
So I'm Tom Lovett. My name's talk is that 3 times a charm. Where I learned building the same app 3 times. So I want to build a healthy frisbee app. Kind of had the idea like 4 years ago. As my skills progressed from year to year, I kind of built and rebuilt it multiple times. So let's give you a second to digest the GIF of ultimate frisbee. It's kind of like soccer, both a frisbee. So the concept for this app is a game tracking app on your phone. So you're looking for a low effort way to track a game score and players on the field. Each point you have players sub on and off. There are apps on the market, but they're very attention intensive. They want you to track every single pass, which as you can see is going to be a lot of work, and it's not necessarily a lot of valuable data. So I want to build a simple UI app so you can, as a player, track your own games, your own performance, your scores throughout a game. And then if the app got big enough, we'd be able to extrapolate data about individual player performance, how teams might match up across each other. And then we got really advanced with this survey module we'll talk about later. We could even get kind of ranking of skills within the sport. So this is the first build. I went to a code bootcamp about 3 years ago. This was my midterm project. It's a simple front end. I later built a full stack app as my final project. You kind of see here, so this is our field on the right side, our bench on the left. So in between points, you sub people on and off the field as they sub off on and off in real life. And then you would just track you score or they score. So our app's supposed to be like very simple, very shallow, just kind of like a demo to like show off to employers. But I was really ambitious and wanted to build a very big production app. And so this failed. So it was very ambitious. Even now, even after like 3-4 years of coding, I still don't have the skills for it. But after I graduated, I want to keep working on it. I worked on it about 2 months. And part of why I stuck with it is because it was my first job hunt. I was in Coast Guard for 4 years, and then I was changing careers into coding. And I didn't even know how to apply for jobs, like how to talk to people on the phone. And then I wasn't really sure how I could apply for jobs and say, yes, I'm good enough to work here, and then explain that to people in a way that I actually like believed it. So I kind of hoped that I would build this app that everyone would use and would love, and I could just say, I built this. Like, I don't have a resume, but I built this. And then why it failed. So these two modules, like Team User Search and Survey module, are pretty advanced. And I tried to build this entire thing at one time. So if you've seen this graphic before, you might know the bottom half of it. But my idea was to have teams connect to each other during a game, so my phone, your phone, and then we search for each other using this alias, kind of like Jiffy Cat as like happy green monkey. But to build that is like its own entire module. There's a whole big build process, and then a survey module where you would rank your teammates' skills and abilities. Again, an entire like module in itself, more than just gameplay. And I did all this without really working in production code. I never did open source. So it was very ambitious. And then I never asked for help because I'm very stubborn. So I was working on it in the summer after I graduated. I was fighting with Cordova because I built it with Angular 1 and then Ionic to port it into mobile. And it was just like little tiny things that just kept going wrong. And eventually I had to give it up and say, okay, this is good enough. Like I need to start applying for jobs because I don't have any money to pay for rent. So there's a missing slide. So I started up again in 2017. I got my first job in the industry. We had an Ember front end, Rails back end, my first exposure to Ember. And I got a lot more optimistic about this and I got interested in doing the project again because I felt like I could actually do it this time. So it really helped that I was working in an office where I was around like production developers, senior developers, because I learned this first 3 months I learned a lot, as you can imagine. And I have a thing where I try to write perfect code all the time, like the entire code base of nothing like wrong about my code, which is not really practical. And it kind of helped me to work on a production app that was like making money and doing well, and seeing that a lot of it was not perfect, some of it very not perfect, but that kind of helped me lower my standards for myself. And then I could also have this code base at work that I could say, oh, like we serialize these 2 miles together at work, and like, okay, and then just like not copy and paste, but take that same idea and put it into my own code base. And then like Ember is so great documentation. I want to keep working with Ember and learn new things and do them on my own. So it was a great chance to practice with Ember. Then Ember Paper 2 made styling a lot easier. I talked about that last meetup before. This also failed, so I didn't code in a straight line, kind of build projects like one at a time. It was like, I'll add this, and then I'll add this, and then I'll add this. And like, I would add features I would like create a user model and then like add in features that are like 2 months down the road, which might make it easier to add that features later, but it's just way too much thinking, way too much work. And then also work, I was getting a little burnt out, and it was hard to spend nights and weekends coding when I didn't really want to code when I went home. And then I didn't ask for help. Okay. So this is where it's at right now. This is the 3rd iteration. This is kind of the gameplay. You can see some teams just scored. We're subbing people on and off the field. I'm going to do it one more time. So this is farther than the gameplay's ever gone before. A lot more features that the previous build didn't have. And then we see just by like subbing people on and off, it tracks all this data of each point as it happened. And then really briefly show you the players, how each individual player's performance, like their plus minus score, how they played. So I started up again because I was job hunting. And it was pretty soul crushing to just do applications and tutorials all the time. I was doing some React tutorials, some other languages, but it got old very quickly, and there was no long-term like day-to-day like satisfaction. So I started up this project again, and it felt a lot better. And then because I didn't have any open source contributions, I didn't have any public code, I couldn't really, I didn't feel like I could convey my skills to potential employers. So that really motivated me to start this up again and stick with it. One of the 2 main things that made me get this far was taking the idea of the MVP. Last time I was building the top way, I was trying to build a complete car all at once. And now I'm trying to build like the skateboard. that's it right now. Like user can track a game, store it online, view it later. That's literally everything. I was like, nothing else outside of that can get added. That helped me kind of build in a straight line of like, okay, add this feature, add this feature, add this feature, stop and go to the next thing, and then like move up, stop, go to the next thing. It also helped me in terms of progress to say, okay, I achieved A, B, and C today. Tomorrow I'll work on D, E, and F. It mentally made the process easier. And then it helped me accept like features that are very simple. They could be a lot more advanced. Ugly styling, which you guys see, I'm not a great UI designer. It's pretty basic, but again, this is just MVP, like alpha build is all I'm really going for right now. So I read Refactor by Martin Fowler also while I was working on this. And this was a big help for me because I tried to write perfect code. And the companies I've worked at didn't plan or refactor as much as I wanted to. So I never really knew like how much do we plan, how much should we refactor. So the maximum that like really stuck with me, like write code that's good enough for now, adding a feature will weak or break in the code, like refactor to accommodate that feature, and then build that new feature. That really helps me decide when to let something stay garbage and when to fix it and make it better. And then also as I was going through refactor, because again, I can like refactor code and over-optimize it endlessly. This said like, no, make this good enough to here and stop there. Like whereas before I would like, okay, I'll fix this. Oh, well, now this looks gross, I'll fix that. And now this looks gross, I'll fix that, and on and on. So this really helped me just work faster and think less. So this is the user flow, which is also farther than it's ever been. See, like this is a team with multiple games. We're going like add players to a roster. So still very simple, but farther than I've ever gone. The front-end MVP only needs some authentication work. I'm working on the back end right now. Then I'll port it into Ember Electron so it can go to mobile. Then I'll just deploy it, and then it's live, which is like way closer than it's ever been. Thanks for listening. If you're more interested in Ultimate, it's pretty fun to watch. There's highlights on YouTube, pretty exciting. If you want to play, bostonfrisbee.com is where I learned to play. It's a lot of fun. And then after this, if anyone has 5-10 minutes, I can use some help with device. Again, so asking for help, so things I'm learning from previous failure.
Nice.
I think there's other repos if anyone wants to look at code.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Don't forget about the Ask Boston Ember thing again.
Yeah.
I asked on Slack one time. No one responded, but I figured it out.
Oh, no!
Anyway, I asked someone else, and the whole like conversation started on that.
Oh, that happens. Sometimes it's okay to ask again after a little bit.
Yeah.
I figured it out, so it was okay, but
Just keep spamming the channel. Someone's either going to tell you to shut up or lie to your problem.
So if you want to take a couple questions, and Savannah, if you want to come set up, and we'll do all the screen sharing business. So who has questions for Tom?
What kind of tests did you write or not write? I'm curious.
I didn't write. I'm just like, just get it to alpha and figure it out later.
Sure. Have you thought maybe starting on the test road?
After it's deployed, I think that's just my thing. Just get it deployed and figure it out later.
What did you learn from doing the same general project 3 times? Did you find that it became easier to think about the problems that you wanted to solve? And did it make you narrow scope in the specific problems, or just made you understand them better, or what? The leading question.
No, I would say it definitely helped me narrow down into problems and like isolate them. Before like gameplay, it was lots of big functions, whereas now I broke it into separate modules. It also helped me like in Ember. I got better at breaking things down and isolating them. Yeah, everything. It definitely helps that I had it before, because I could just look at the build visually, because I'm not a very visual person. I can say, oh, like I built it that way, just kind of do it again. Whereas like the first time, taking the idea from my head onto the screen was a lot harder. Now I can just be like, oh yeah, just copy that again, do that again.
full screen. The thing to watch out for is that if you do a full screen, you swipe back and forth.
On it was I think it was Boston JS or on the Ember Ask Ember on Slack.
Does that make sense?
And yeah, it got buried, no responded, but I figured it out.
If I full screen,
I tried though, so I feel better about it.
it's gonna break the screen share.
Which,
But if I
your-
just
your
move
front end
between
versus
apps,
your
it's
back
okay.
end.
Okay. So I'm using one.
What's your-
Yeah, if you
what's
don't
the
use multiple full
Front end
screens, if
and
you
you
just
set
have
your
this in here, so you can make this window like way bigger.
The first node server was pretty bad because I built it like everything at once.
Yeah.
Since then, it's been only Rails. But I'd say that the front end changed the most, going from
Command plus.
like a monolith, like small app, just like very big and spread out and not really isolated well, to like very neat and tidy.
Okay. If it's too tiny, we can change the resolution and stuff like that.
Size up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was the whole thing. People like, oh, like if you had the app, you'd be like, hey, are you guys on Updog? So I would say, what's Updog? But there's Updog Ultimate is like a dog frisbee. So I imagine, if I tried it, I would get sued. I imagine. So
Entering the dog agility market.
To suggest one other way to ask for help, in addition to this community Slack, which is good, the forum, discuss that everyday.com is another good place. And it's a little bit less hurried.
It's a lot more async, yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot more like async, so you can post a question and come back a day later, you got a pretty good chance.
Yeah, there's a good core group of folks who reply to questions. It's really nice to see.
And we try to push some questions there so that other people, so they'll live on and people will see those answers when they search for them and find them, which is easier in Discuss than in Slack.
Yeah, since we lose the history. Yeah.
All right, thank you, Tom. Everyone, I'd like to introduce Savannah, who's going to tell us about Ember Animated.
Hi, I'm Savannah. And this summer I've been working with Ed on Ember Animated. I first learned Ember, then Ember Animated, and now I'm going to teach you with the documentation that's now updated. I'm probably actually going to have to sit because I have to interact with this stuff. But so basically, this is a library that's going to allow you to implement animations in your Ember applications. So I'm just going to walk you through the basic concepts of Ember animated animation. So I think the first thing that's important to understand is all that, but also this. So what a sprite is and how you can use it in your animations. So on a base level, a sprite is just an HTML element, but in Ember Animated, a sprite also holds data about, it stores data about itself. So its width, height, styles, and bounds. And so essentially, so let me back up. A sprite is the thing in your application that you want to animate. So, and this is a term that's been used for a long time. And there are multiple different types of sprites. There are 5 different types of sprites. So we're going to talk about the first 3 first, but all 5 are inserted sprites, kept sprites, removed sprites, sent sprites, and received sprites. And what separates these things, these categories, is whether the sprite stores its initial bounds and its final bounds, or in other words, the place that it's going to start and the place that it will end. So this table really sums it up here. So an inserted sprite won't store where it starts, but it knows where it's going to end. A removed sprite would be the opposite. And then a kept sprite has, a better way to understand this would be this demonstration. So imagine that if you were animating an inbox, that each sprite is an email. So here we have the initial set of emails, and this, if you watch this log as I demonstrate, it's going to show you, well, by the message, what category each email will go into as far as sprites goes. So if I click this, imagine this icon is refreshing your inbox, and in comes a new email. This is Aloha, is your inserted sprite, because it, so remember, it does not have an initial bounds, but its final bounds or its end position was the inbox. And then if I wanted to now delete this email and maybe a few others, they're going to leave. And they are now removed sprites. So their initial bounds or starting position was the inbox, and then they left. And finally, the remaining emails here are kept sprites, which makes it so basically they both start and end of the inbox and simply move based on or adjusting for the incoming and outgoing emails. You can see here. And here's the accompanying code. So here things are basically just flying in and out. But now with Ember Animated, you can use transitions to make this, like to customize how each category of sprite will animate from one state to another. So from their starting position to their final position. For example, you could assign the fade. So transitions assign motions to sprite categories. So for example, you could assign fade to all inserted sprites. And every single time that an inserted sprite would be added to a list, it would fade. So there are two built-in transitions, which I'm going to demonstrate in a second, fade and move over. And then you can also create your own transitions. It's important to know that transitions are interruptible. So every time the state of a sprite will change, the transition will run again. So here is a simple demonstration. Imagine that the message is a sprite. It will fade in and fade out using the fade transition. So every time I click this button, the state of a sprite will change. So the state of the message will change. And it's interruptible. It didn't finish the transition, but I changed the sprite. There we go. This. And then fade, the name is self-explanatory. That's the way that this will animate. And then move over, similar idea. It has, although it has 4 options, it can move left, right, up, and down. So here, hello and goodbye. And this actually is going to use rules, which I'll explain soon, that compares 2 messages and chooses a specific transition to apply to this sprite or message. And then finally, here's a custom transition, slide from side. And in this case, so here is the way that the transition is, slide from side is implemented, and you can see that there's 3 different sprite categories being used here. So just to review, this message would be an inserted sprite where its final bounds is like this area of the page. Now it's a remove sprite where it started here. And the case where it's a kept sprite would be when I interrupt. So now it should end up back in the same place that it started. And you can, so then each category here is assigned to the motion move. So then it's also important to understand what a motion does and how it's different from a transition. So a motion, while transitions handle sprites at a categorical level, motions handle each individual sprite. So they'll animate the change in an attribute value of a given sprite. So each motion takes a sprite as a first argument and options as a second argument, and can have to and from arguments as well. So their initial attribute value and their final attribute value. So to make this more clear, like an example would be if you have a motion that animates the change in a sprite in that sprite's color. So if the sprite has the initial color of red and a final color of blue, a motion would take this initial color red, final color blue, and smoothly animate this change in color of that sprite. And there are multiple built-in transitions, which I'll show here. So move basically animates the sprite from its initial to a final position using CSS transforms. This is the same demonstration from before. And again, here this is the actual motion applied, which is move. And it only takes, easing is the only option that it takes. So you can see it easy in and out. And then Ember Animated also works with SVGs, so which is an image format made of XML. And so in this case, on a circle, move SVG is applied, animating the CX, CY, and R properties here. Same thing, here's move them would be the transition in this case, while the motion applied is move SVG on this property. So it's kind of fun. See them animating. And then opacity is also a demonstration from before, but going more in depth here. Opacity animates, again, sprite from initial to final opacity, 0 to 100% or 100 to 0%. So here, this is the motion fade in and fade out being applied to groups of sprites as they are inserted, or as the message is inserted and removed. And there's a couple others. Resize animates the change in height and width, and scale transforms, uses CSS transforms to animate the initial size to the final size of a sprite. And then finally, there are groups of adjustment motions, these three. This one responsible for when a sprite is moving into an area of a page with scaling or out of that, so it has to adjust for the scale. And then initial color, which we talked about before, and finally CSS styling. And this applies to properties that have a unit or a number. So here you can see all of these motions at work, smoothly animating these words. Oops. And then as you slowly remove some, you can see, actually, let me start with just getting rid of one. So if I take away adjust color, the motion, you'll see that that's more abrupt and not as smooth. And then this applies to the others. It just gets uglier and uglier. And then finally, without any motions, it's not even slightly fun. So, and then I touched on this a little bit earlier, so I'm going to circle back to rules for data-dependent animations. And rules can be defined when you want to use different transitions under different conditions. So instead of, and it's important that the rules can be applied in animations like that are data-dependent. So you can use rules to compare data values and choose different transitions instead of just applying one transition in all cases. So here, if the data set is numbers, you can increment and decrement this counter. And notice that it can go up or down. So so the data is the numbers, and it's comparing, say it compares 19 to 20, where 19 is less than 20, then the rules would decide that the to up transition would be used. Otherwise, when the number is smaller, it would go, or this is up, so down. You get the idea, but basically it's choosing which transition based on the number of values and how they compare to each other. And then finally, to get back to the final sprite categories that I didn't talk about before, sprites can travel between two components. And when this happens, send sprites and receive sprites, or those categories are used. So in this scenario, sprites will always have their initial and their final bounds. So because if a sprite is constantly going between two places, its initial bounds and final bounds would be interchanging. So it'd start one place and end another place, and then start that place and end at the other place. So a better example, or more concrete example of what this could look like is, let me define these first. So a received sprite, by definition, is when the final bounds become the initial bounds, and it would be a received sprite on the list that it was going to, and then sent sprites are the reverse. So when the initial bounds of a sprite become the final bounds, it is a sent sprite on the list that it came from. So here's the full table now, and maybe some of you are familiar with the show The Office, and then you might also be familiar with the dinner party episode, which is a kind of famous episode, but if not, I will explain. So basically, Jan and Michael are hosting a dinner party, and due to office politics, it causes a lot of problems. So it's one of those situations like, I'll go if you go. Like, I don't know if I want to go. Like, I'm going, no, I'm not going. So when you have a good way to represent the situation would be you have like an invite the guest list, and there are the people that are going and the people that I can't go. And if everyone's indecisive, then they'd be going back and forth. So, for example, if Dwight is first deciding that he's going, but then realizes that Michael's not going, then he would obviously decide not to go. So you can see the sprite log down here, but when he starts in the going list, his initial bounds are going, and then his final bouncer can't go. So he would be a sent sprite from the going list and a received sprite from the can't go list. And then if he changes his mind again, the reverse would be true. So he would be a received sprite on the going list and a sent sprite from the can't go list. So you get the idea. And like if he's super indecisive, then this might happen. So this applies to all of them. So I really like that episode. Yeah, and then finally, you can also animate across routes. So here you can, if you watch, okay, it's really small up here, but if you watch, the route will change as you click on an icon. The icon will animate as well as the icons behind will fade while this zooms in. And this is all while the route is changing. Animating between two places, two routes. So yeah, so those are the basic concepts of Ember animated. And yeah, that's about it. There's docs are still being written. Contributions are encouraged. About it. So thank you.
Nice.
Awesome. So Ed, if you want to come set up, and Savannah, if you want to take some questions. What questions do people have about Ember Animated?
What's your favorite thing that Ember Animated can do?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, I had a lot of fun with the dinner party guest list demonstration. I think that I really like, what I think is super interesting is the way that like the human brain and the eye, like we look at things and like things are pretty and things are not. So like the way that it can make things much more aesthetically pleasing is nice. So I guess the whole concept.
All that, and I was like, oh my god, I haven't desperately want to do that.
Right.
That's what I was thinking the whole time during the first talk, actually, because you're moving people from on the field to off the field. It's the dinner party example.
Yeah.
I got a question on, so there's liquid fire, there's animated. If I don't have animation in my app today, what should I try?
Oh, really?
Okay.
Different ports, man.
Okay.
Of course.
Is it gonna be
Not
like
supposed to,
very
but yeah.
feature compatible, like the API isn't in too big of a flux right now?
I'm not as familiar with liquid fire as I rated. I might be volume on that person.
The future is now. The future is now. I should use it. Yeah, I should use it now. There's no reason not to use it.
Yes.
PR as well. Of course. It said right there.
I think you need to do it. There you go. Thank you.
I know, sure. Okay. I'll have answer that question too, which is that like one of the next steps for Ember Animated is to get factored in as a layer under Liquid Fire. It's not intended to like Liquid Fire is still supported. It does great things. It has APIs that just does not that are more of an application level concerns, like having a transitions map that tells you how every route goes to every other route. Still a really nice thing to have. That's kind of a Liquid Fire level concern. It will keep doing that. Ember Animated is to be like all component level stuff. And so it fits in nicely under Liquid Fire, and that's the intent. To like make Liquid Fire just use it. And then you can use either directly, however you want. If you want just component stuff, use just Ember Animated. If you want to have like a transitions.js file that describes all the transitions from route to route in your application, Liquid Fire gives you that on top. That's the plan, what we want to do.
So make sure I understood that correctly. Roughly, Ember Animated will power Liquid Fire, and Liquid Fire will build on top.
Yeah, think about it as a glimmerization of Liquid Fire. Right? So, and for those who don't know, Glimmer is the underlying low-level rendering system like the component-level system that powers Ember, and it was kind of extracted as ideas from Ember, perfected as a library, and then brought in underneath again. And that's kind of the intent for what we're doing here too. Okay, I don't have anything on the screen. Why?
We see
You're
now.
good.
Oh,
You're
we
good.
do now? Okay.
And
Okay,
then
good.
do the screen share with that green button there.
Okay. Cool. Okay. This is going to be me being brave and doing things very dynamically.
Oh, one thing.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt
Sure.
your braveness. Don't switch back and forth between full screen things or it'll break stuff.
Okay, but like,
So
yeah.
stay
yeah,
windowed.
Correct.
Basically.
Okay, yeah. Yes, so this is a talk about import, and not even necessarily just Ember auto import, but that's where I'm going to start. I kind of have 3 phases of things to talk about, and they're going to go in order of like the most immediately useful to you first, and then like we'll move out from there and see where things go. So I'm going to take suggestions from the audience. We would like to think about a case where you might want to, you see some cool JavaScript library. It's not Ember specific, but you might want to use it in your Ember app. Can I get some suggestions for a library you might want to add to an Ember app?
Yes.
Okay. Anybody else? Maybe that's too easy. Moment. Okay.
ND array.
ND array. I don't know that one.
It's like a n-dimensional array.
Oh, okay. ND array sounds good. Okay. Anybody else?
Natural language processing tools. NLP compromise.
NLP compromise. That's a npm package. Okay.
D3.
D3. Okay. D3. Yeah. Let's see. What should we go with? GraphViz. Okay. Yeah. So let's go with. Let's see. What was the first? What did you say, Keith?
ND array.
ND array. I can remember that one. Let's try that. So up until now, if you've had to add something like that to an Ember application, you would have gone and learned about, well, the first thing you should really do is go search Ember Observer and see if somebody's already done an integration for you, right? And that's great. Then you just install some Ember package. Maybe people have already written not just a way to bring the library in, but actual Ember components and helpers and things that make it really nice to use. That's still totally a great way to go, right? So like, if somebody's already done that integration work for you, that's amazing. What I'm suggesting here is not to say you shouldn't ever do that stuff anymore. If people are actually adding value add on top of a library and making it Ember specific, great, keep doing that. But if we just want the library and if there are no components out there or we don't want them, how do we get them in? So up till now, you would have had to learn about the app.import API. You'd write some custom code that runs at build time. All of that has gotten a lot easier than it used to be because of the fact that now it like will automatically find things in node modules for you, and that's all better than it used to be. But the point of the Ember auto import add-on is to make it easier still. So this is the add-on I'm talking about. I noticed that Chad just pointed out on Twitter that it's actually 74% Perl. That's pretty misleading. It's not really Perl. I've written a lot of Perl in my career, and I don't want to do it again. The reason it actually says that is because I vendored a script that I run in the test suite. That it's called Parallel. It's GNU Parallel. It just runs it builds like 7 different Ember apps in parallel with each other, and it's just a shell script. And because it's stored in the tests, it's actually bigger than all my code. So like the library looks like it's written in Perl. It's actually written in TypeScript for the most part.
Just for what it's worth, I believe there is a way to instruct GitHub to ignore that.
Ah, good. I should figure that out.
For example, it does it by default for node modules. It's not a good node module. It's a special
yes, that makes sense. That makes sense.
There is a way to do it.
I should do that then. I wouldn't want people to think it's written in Perl.
But this is great.
Yeah.
I got accused of accosting you with Perl.
Well, exactly. I saw that and I was like, wow, how did that happen? And I looked and realized it was actually my original repo also did that. So let's go and add ND array into an Ember app. I've never tried to add ND array before.
Can you hide the little?
Oh yeah, is that in the way?
It's in the way of the line you're on. Just click the hide button.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay.
And then begin.
Yeah, and begin.
Thank you.
Enhance.
So I have here a freshly generated Ember app. Like the only commit is the one from Tomster. There's nothing else.
So cute.
Yeah, isn't that? It's great. I love it. He's got a lot of commits on GitHub now, right?
He does.
So I'm gonna do. I'm gonna add Ember auto import and ND array. Is that right?
That's right.
Okay. So you should never really run npm installs during talks, but we're among friends here. I can work on my stand-up while we watch it install, maybe.
At least some of it should be cached. So.
Yeah, hopefully, you'd think, maybe. You should never really make bets, though. But, that's why I said I was going to be brave and take an audience suggestion.
We're proud of it.
So let's start up our app. So I hadn't started the app yet. If I had already added Ember auto import and was running the app, I can actually add new dependencies without restarting Ember S, and that will actually work, which is kind of cool. I didn't get to show that. So, okay, I have an app. It's not doing anything or complaining about anything. Let's see if we can add our things. So maybe just if I open up app.js, which is a perfectly good file that runs when your app boots, let's try to import. Well, actually, I should probably figure out what the hell ND array is. Because we won't know if it works if we don't know what it's supposed to do, I suppose. Come on, internet.
Ironically, the yarn install is faster than looking at the
Yeah, yeah. Okay, there we go. Let's see. It gives you multi-dimensional, provides higher dimensional arrays from one-day arrays. Okay, that seems nice. Install it, and then you just get ND array from it. And then you have a constructor that can make an ND array. Okay, let's try that. So let's import ND array from ND array then. And maybe like,
I guess a new ND array or something.
yeah, let's do like let A equal new ND array 1, 2, 3. Hey, we got one. Okay, it worked. That was it. So all of that is like actually a little underwhelming, which is that easy, and that's how it should be. That was kind of the point, right? So how does this work? And that's kind of phase 2 of my talk. Actually, before we get to that, let's do one last thing with it, which is a feature of. So what we had before, which I just deleted, was we import ND array from ND array. And you're definitely familiar with this kind of imports, right? If you've written any kind of Ember code at all, Ember standardized pretty early on using ES standard import syntax like this, right? And these are static imports. And everything about these imports is very static on purpose. That's how they're designed. And when I say static, what I mean is without running the code, you can be sure of what's going to happen. Right, so a build tool, a compiler, can look at this module and know for sure that there's a list of other files that need to load first before this can load. Right? You can tell the thing that truly makes it static is you don't have to run this code to find that out. Right? Now that's really nice. It lets us like roll up all the things we need into one build very easily. It lets Ember Auto import find the things it needs. And similarly, like following recursively down the chain, ND array might very well depend on 17 different other libraries. That would all still get pulled in because the build tools we're using here, under the hood, Ember Auto Import calls out to Webpack, which goes and follows all those links and finds everything that you need and builds it up for you. All of that works nicely with static imports. Now, but static imports can't do everything. Like one thing they definitely cannot do is like, if we need arrays, then import them, right? And do stuff with them. This doesn't work. Like this is a parse error. Like JavaScript does not allow import to be here. It can't do that. Right? So there is a newer JavaScript feature, which is dynamic import, usually written as import parentheses, that can do this. Right? So you would write it like this, and it's going to dynamically go and find the thing. And the biggest difference, though, well, I mentioned the first difference, which is that instead of being static, it's now dynamic. And that's really big difference because now you can't actually tell what to do without running the code. So when I say dynamic, that's what I mean. This code has to run to decide like if we're ever going to get there. Because we need array, it could be arbitrarily complicated. It could go and maybe the value of that depends on going and talking to the network and asking it some questions. And it could depend on arbitrarily complicated stuff, right? So you can't tell yet if you actually need this thing. So it's very dynamic. In fact, it's allowed to be very, very dynamic. Like you could actually say n plus d array, right? And that would also still work, right? You can have arbitrarily complicated JavaScript in there too. Now, the tools we're using don't allow this to get super crazy, like to the extreme. Like this stuff, you should probably not try to do that. Because there's caveats, right? Like there's a limit to how weird this thing you're importing could be, and that our build tools would still understand them. But for the most part, you don't care about that. You care about this case, which is I want to load this thing, but not immediately, and I might want to load it at some point, right? So actually, let's motivate this a little better with a real example because like so far we just showed that we could load this code and we could use it in our app.js. So it's basically just a piece of code that's going to run when the app boots. Let's actually make a route that does things, and let's see. let's make a route like, call it array maybe. And so, because we're only going to use ND-array on that route, right? So if somebody comes to the home page, they don't need ND-array. Maybe we don't want to make them load it. They could have less JavaScript to load, right? So if I've added this new route called array, and it's got a template, right? Like right now it's got the default one here. Let's go to the array route. So here's my route I just generated. Let's make a model for loading the stuff for this array. And maybe if this was a real application, maybe I would be doing something like this store find record. Maybe I'd find my array that I want to show. I could, load. I would basically load data, right, that I want to use in this fancy array route. Maybe we should actually just do that too. I'm inventing this as I go. We'll see how this goes. Still too small?
Thank you.
Yeah.
You can kill the sidebar.
Yeah, I should totally do that. So let's actually have an array. So in any Ember app, you can have a in your public directory. Let's make a new file. Let's save it in public. That is not embiggened. Back a level. So you always have a public folder, and you can put anything you want in there, right? So if I have fancy data.json, I can totally do that, and I could have I don't know, things. I guess I should make it real JSON, huh? I guess because it's multidimensional, I could do ooh, I don't know. Let's get fancy. So we've got data now, and we could say fetch. This is going to be, we'll just call it fancy data, right? Then, so if you're not familiar with the fetch API, this is just built into the web. It's just a nice way to fetch data. It's the modern way to do AJAX. Works in all the modern browsers. You can polyfill it for the ones where it doesn't. But it gives you a promise for a response, and the response has another promise returning thing that can give you JSON. So we should just do it like that. And this would load up our data, right? So now in my array template, I could say each model, what did I call it? Things. Okay. That's thing. Let's see if we got this working. Thank you. Maybe. All of this has nothing to do with imports, of course. This is just how apps work, right? So I should still have, oh, what happened? Let's learn together. Oh, you can't use array is a built-in? Oh, that's a terrible.
I thought you were doing
You
that.
thought, oh no, I didn't even know that. I didn't catch that. Okay.
We should remove it. Someone should file a bug. It was for array control.
Oh, really?
Because you were
wow,
allowed
we're getting
to
a history lesson here too.
You were allowed to have a default array route array controller.
That's bananas.
That
oh
all
yeah,
array
yeah,
controllers
you're
descend
right.
from. Just
You're
like
right.
a basic route. If you put a file,
Yeah.
Ember route/basic, all the routes that you don't specify, Ember will give you a default one.
Yes.
Anyways.
Wow,
it's
that's
bad.
quite a
You
history
should do
lesson.
that.
That's
We
totally
should
a
do it.
history lesson. Yes. Okay.
Back in my day.
Wow. Okay, that's good. That's good. We're learning together. That was the point. Okay, so we'll call our route demo, and we'll just grab this stuff and move it over there. Oh no, I hate when GS Code does that. I need to turn that feature off. Okay, now I have a route called demo, and it should actually do the thing. Oh, I need to delete the other one because it's totally mad at me just for it existing. Oh no, not that one. Did I do it? Okay, I think I stopped it in time. Thankfully, Ember CLI doesn't load instantly. Okay, we're getting there. Okay, we're happy. We got it. It's good. Let's go to array. No, it's not called array anymore. Demo. Oh, that's the wrong autocomplete. Okay, we have a demo route. It's there. It's doing things. Oh, and there's our numbers. Okay, so we have the data. It loaded. If we could even look at the network and see that we loaded some data. Okay, there's fancy JSON. Right. I mean, this wasn't the topic of my talk about how to stub out data, but often people forget that, or when they're just getting started, it's very easy to be shuffled down the path of thinking like you should always load data with Ember data, and that is totally a good thing to do when you're building a sophisticated application that's gonna like read data and edit it and patch it and save it and delete it. But when you're not doing all that, you can start very simple. You could literally just drop some JSON on disk, fetch it, it's all good. And I thought it was worth doing here because I wanted to actually show a concept here, which is, we've got a route here that needs data, and the natural place to do it in Ember is in a model hook, because the fact that that lets the router take care of waiting around for the data to load for you, and then by the time you're rendering it, you don't have to think about that anymore, right? So let's, in fact, let's just have like a component, because I want to work in a component, show the array. And Ember won't be mad at me for this one, right?
No.
Okay.
Don't call me property state.
Okay, right. So instead, this is what I was printing before. Instead, I'm going to be like, show the array equals model things. Okay, and now I can actually like, nope, not that. I guess we'll say like, actually, let's just like dump the debug thing, because we're not trying to make a real app here. We're trying to prove a point. This is a great template. I like that feature, I do. The way it auto-completes the imports for you. I did call it array, right? Yeah. This array. Okay. Why do you not like that? Okay. So it dumped. It works. Oh, and also, by the way, we still have our welcome guy here. I don't mind having the welcome guy around. I like the Toaster. He's very welcome to be here. But I don't want him on every single page. I'm actually gonna move him to just the index page. So the reason being, we don't really have anything on our homepage, and I want something there. So now we can actually change between these routes, and we should see that when we're on the home page, we just have Toaster, and on the array page, the demo page, we have our demo array. Okay, so all that is to set us up and say, now we've got a route that needs a new library, and we only want to load it on this page. So let's do a dynamic import. And so because we're already probably loading data for our demo route, the natural place to load code is the same place for loading data. Like while you're loading the data, you want to load the code, right? So a route is a great place to do that. So the first thing is, instead of having just the data coming out of here, we want to make room to have more than one thing. So I could say like, let the data equal this, and I want to return. Let's use the RSVP hash helper.
I would just use async await.
You would use, okay, yeah, let's use async await.
Fetch. Every browser supports fetch.
Well, so the only reason I would not necessarily use async await is I don't want to do them in series. Let's talk about that. Yeah, let's use async await. So one thing, so when Robert says use await, what he means is this. I can say async model response is await fetch, and let data equal await response JSON. This is something that might trip you up the first time you use fetch, which is that like this thing is also returns a promise, because you get the response immediately even before all the data has streamed in. So if you actually want all the data as a JSON, you still got to wait more. Because basically fetch can do fancy streaming things. Like you can get part of the data before you have all the data, which is nice. So before I was just, and that's got like things on it. So I could actually just put, actually let's just call it, yeah, that's fine. Things is data things. This actually now will kind of match what I already had before, right? I think that should work. Yeah, that still works. Okay. So, but what I've left myself is room to put more stuff here. I could put the code, right? I could put nd array here if I could figure out what to load, right? So let's just say let nd array equal await import nd array, and actually we're close to right. But what this is going to give me is an object representing the module, and it has like a .default for the default export, and it has like if there's named exports like some function or whatever, you would have to pull those off of it. So here we would actually say ndarray.default. I want the default export from the module. Oh, and so you'll notice my editor is mad at me about this, and that's because import is not quite yet a fully mature JavaScript feature. It's like a stage 3 feature.
You can fix it by adding Babel ESLint.
Yes, that's what I'm about to do.
Sorry.
That's okay. And also, like, actually, also, so there's actually 2 different systems mad at me here, right? One is that the linter, which my editor's running ESLint, and ESLint doesn't know what this is. It says that's not valid JavaScript. You might ask, why isn't it valid JavaScript? Because import could just be, I could have a function named import. Wouldn't that be okay? The answer is no. The people who wrote the JavaScript parsing spec assumed they might someday want to use import as a special word, and they ruled it out. And it's actually, it's not a function. It looks like a function, but it turns out it has weird behavior that functions cannot have. Do you have any guesses? No. So it actually comes down to when you do things like some relative thing, right? If you say that in different places, it means different things. But you can do imports relative to where you are and get a different answer.
So does it use import.meta?
I don't know what you mean.
Import.meta is another spec. It's also stage 2 or 3.
Okay.
But it lets you have metadata about the current location.
Sure, right, yeah, and that's probably why that's probably called import.meta, because it needs these same kind of magical features, right? A normal function doesn't know where it's called from unless you do crazy hacks and you like inspect your call stack and you need to do black art and sacrifice to the gods and stuff. But import is spec to be that way, so it's a special thing. It's not a function. So, but yeah, so ESLint is mad at me. My linter doesn't know, but Babel also it doesn't know how to build this code. So I literally can't run it. Right? Not just that my linter is mad at me, but I can't run the code. So we need to teach Babel how to compile it, and we also need to tell our linter what to do. So this is just a standard feature that Ember auto import can have, and the README tells you what to do. So it says we need Babel ESLint, which we will add. Not npm though.
Why does it not do it for you?
Why doesn't it add this? Because you don't always need it. Maybe you don't have any dynamic imports in your app, right? It's the feature you can use if you want, and it is a stage 3 feature, right? So
presumably it could at least detect that you use the feature and give you a nice warning in the console.
That might be nice. Yeah, that might be nice. We can improve that.
I agree.
You should send me a PR for that. I agree.
I will.
So that gives me that helps take care of ESLint. We need to tell it to do the right thing. That's not the right file. ESLint.rc. Here we need to tell it what parser to use. And that should make, all of a sudden, actually, you saw this file turn green in live time because VS Code's pretty smart about that. So now the linter is happy, but our code still doesn't build because Babel is what's responsible for taking all the modern JavaScript we write and converting it down into JavaScript that can run in the browser. And it doesn't know how to do this feature, right? So we need one last thing. That is what is in here as the 3rd step, which tells me to add a Babel plugin to my config. And again, this is something, yes, we could consider doing automatically for you if we thought this is something every app needs. But if you're not doing any dynamic imports, you don't get it right now, and that seems okay. So add the options here. So this is what I need. And so here I'm telling Babel to add an additional plugin. That is the Ember Auto Import Babel plugin. And now I probably do really need to start my server over again to pull in the new Babel plugin.
While this is building, if you change that to require.resolve, you will be able to have parallel Babel builds.
Oh, really?
If you do not get parallel Babel builds.
Interesting.
Because we can't.
Yeah, you can't take that thing and serialize it. Okay,
processes.
Good to know. Good to know. That's another PR you should file to the README. Okay, so now it runs again, and now where are we? So let's go look at our code. So like we have this thing to load the thing, and it works, and we now have an ND array in our template. We were passing the array into our component. Let's also pass in ND array equals model ND array, and now in my component, show the array.js, right? I should be able to like use it here, right? Like this ND array, say new this ND array, this array, let thing equal that, and I I don't know, I guess, well, let's console log the thing maybe. That's maybe as good as I can do because I don't know what I can do with an ND array. Let's see. It didn't blow up, and we logged the thing. Like this is like output from that library, right? If we look at our network tab, actually to make this transition easier, let me just quickly give myself a link from the home page to where we're going. Link to demo. I guess I could just call it link to demo. Does it auto fill in a word?
Yes, you got it in a second.
Yeah, I said in a second. All right, so it didn't like me doing that.
Yeah,
You know what? I never used this format of
this
it.
is a super troll, actually. The first R is either the route name or the title, depending on which
Yeah,
one it is.
yeah. I almost always use the block form, and I didn't want to do too much typing. So now I have a link though that goes back and forth, right? And my whole point in doing that was I can come in here now, and I can look at the network, and like this is the stuff I loaded. That's fine. And then when I go to the demo, I now have two requests for the data and the code. Right? So not until I entered the route did the code load. And I was able to, my component still had access to it, could still use it. Just the same way that I'm waiting for the data to load, I'm waiting for the code to load. They'll come together. And so you see it's named like chunk blah, 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 blah. And it comes from the same directory that all your other JavaScript comes from. That's
like a hash.
yeah, and exactly. That's a SHA of the contents, right? So it's just like the ones that are normally that when you do a production build, all your assets get hashes on them. This is just a feature in the Webpack build that is doing that, and so it's just turned on all the time so that you don't worry about that. It also because this Ember Auto Import turns off the regular Broccoli asset rev fingerprinting for these chunks because otherwise it'd be hard for us to find them at runtime. So. So that's like the thing. If we have it basically all working, we're able to load our code and our data and use them in our app. And now, like if we go back and forth again, it doesn't load again. The data loads again because you notice we didn't do any caching. We didn't use Ember data. We didn't have any caching rules. So the data will load every time I come in the route, but the code only loads the first time as I go back and forth. Right? It only had to load once, and then when you call import again, it's already there. So like that was it. That's all it takes. An interesting thing about these dynamic imports is even if you don't use them in your own code, the libraries that you call could still use them and generate chunks, and that will all still work also. So if you auto import some library, and it itself uses dynamic imports, that will just work. You don't have any special setup to do. It does mean that if you're using Ember auto import, you need to know you might have these extra chunks lying around, because one of your libraries might choose to split some stuff up for you. And lastly, because Rob suggested I use await, we should clean one thing up that will otherwise annoy me, which is the way our model loading works here. Right now, we're gonna first wait for the response, then wait to load all the JSON from it, and then we will start loading the library. Strictly speaking, if we want to load this as fast as we can, we want to load the library at the same time we're loading the data, right? And when you're using await like this, it's easy to accidentally not do it that way, right? So, because this is going to wait till all the data loads and then start loading the code and then finish loading the code, and we really just want to do them in parallel. So let's clean that up. There's a couple ways we could do it. You know, basically, like these two things do actually go in series because you have to get the response and then you have to get the data. So maybe we could like give them their own async function, like this. Right. And then we could say something like, let's see, we could say data and ND array are await promise all, and then have them here as promises. And so we could load like this, the data, and import ND array. Actually, yeah, let's see, this should be fine, right? That should be fine. Oh, why don't you? Oh, I need a comma. Yeah. Okay, and now this should still work, and it does. And you know, like the actual performance impact when we're testing this locally and the data is small is like probably invisible, but I felt it was worth pointing out as a kind of teaching thing for how this stuff works. you look at the JavaScript, you'll see the chunks there. The chunks there. Okay. Yeah. So like if we looked really carefully at the timings, maybe we would see this loading faster. But that seems good. So that is like the complete how to use Ember auto import. There's not a lot more to it. There's a couple other little kind of frequently asked questions in the README that come down to like some edge cases people tend to hit. So like the final part of my talk is just to pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about how it works inside. Partly because that's just interesting, I think, and partly because it helps you understand more and think about where the boundary conditions are and what you can do and can't do. The pattern that I follow here actually is the same pattern I used in a much, much older add-on called Ember Browserify, back when Browserify was kind of the best thing that could build NPM packages for the web. And the world kind of moved on and made newer, cooler, faster, better things. And so the first version of Ember Auto Import actually used Rollup, which is a perfectly good thing for building packages. And then I moved to Webpack mostly because I just wanted to choose the thing that is super popular, because it means that most libraries out there, if they can't be loaded by Webpack, they probably got a bug filed already. So it was kind of like a safety of the herd issue. Now, the downside of Webpack is that the config system for Webpack is kind of horrendous. And so that's part of the point of bringing it into the Ember community under the umbrella of a much more automated system.
That's
right?
a you problem, not a me problem.
Exactly. It becomes my problem, not your problem. Yes. And the things that are tough about it really are that it's very, like, configuration doesn't compose nicely out of many sources, right? The whole tool is built around the idea that you control the whole config for your application. You know in advance all your dependencies, and you know how to customize the settings for each one so that they will all load. So the dependencies themselves can't do a whole lot to tell you about that and help you out. So it's the kind of thing where Ember Auto Import lets you go like add extra config and pass it through to Webpack if you need something custom or you need to work around a bug. If you need to do that though, you should probably also file an issue on Ember Auto Import, because we don't want people to have to customize, especially in your apps. It's not a giant deal, but if you're an add-on author who's trying to add more Webpack config to all of the apps that use you, and many add-on authors start doing that, the problem of getting all those configs from all those add-ons and combining them together is just like an unsolvable problem with the way Webpack works. So we don't want add-ons to need it. We just want to have very standard stuff that works good. How does it work? If you go read the docs for Webpack, Webpack expects to just be like given the main entry point to your app, and it follows all the imports and it builds everything, right? That's how it expects to work. And we're not using it that way because we already have this whole existing system that has expectations about where the code is, how it finds each other, how Ember add-ons add code to your builds. And we're not disrupting all of that, right? This works in any app that you have today. It doesn't change everything else about your build. It just adds new things. So the way it works is, let's go look at the code. This like slightly more than one screen of code is the whole main entry point for Ember Auto Import. If you've ever written an Ember add-on, if you haven't, don't panic. You don't have to take notes. There's basically just like two. Rob, that's good. Yeah. Rob is joking because he knows way more about this than me. But there's really only two kind of key pieces here that we're using. These are two hooks that any Ember add-on can use to integrate themselves with the build. And the third one here is kind of a special case for fast boot, which is not super relevant to how does it overall work. You should just know that it works if you're using fast boot. That's just good. So when you set up a preprocessor registry, is just where it's your chance to say, hey, I know how to do something to JavaScript files, or I know how to do something to template files, and I would like to offer that to anybody using me. And so when we register a preprocessor for JavaScript, and that just means that any of the JavaScript that the consuming package that's using Ember Auto Import, now that could be your application. If you add Ember Auto Import to your application, all of your code is going to run through this preprocessor. It could also be if you are an add-on author and you're using Ember Auto Import, all of your add-on code will run through this preprocessor. It's just your package. It's not. If you're an add-on author and you use this, but the app doesn't use this, that's okay. We won't handle all the app's code. That's up to them. It's nicely separated. The preprocessor registry actually is structured very nicely, so that it's scoped nicely. So we register ourselves so that we're going to get to look at all of the JavaScript. and we look up this is auto import lookup here exists because we have a single copy of auto import that's actually running and responsible for doing all the work in the entire build, regardless of whether the app is using it, an add-on is using it, many add-ons are using it, many add-ons and the app are using it. Between all of those, they basically just like pick a winner, and that one does the whole build. And the reason for that is that you really want them to have, you want the one that does the build to have global visibility of all the things being imported, because if two add-ins import the same thing, it's actually nice that they get a shared copy. You don't really want two copies, right? You want to have a single optimized global build. And so that's why we do auto import lookup, and that finds the active one. And then we tell it to analyze the broccoli tree we have been given.
Wait, can you say that again? Sorry.
Sure. Which part?
Lookup.
Lookup? Yeah, so well, we could look at how it's implemented. So when you look up on auto import, that is a static method here. And it really just looks for a global that already exists, and the first one wins.
So it's like singleton module scope-ish.
Yeah. Well, not just module scope. It's global is an actual
smarter
global.
things.
Yeah.
Imagine a variable and. Sorry.
Well, if it was in module scope, it wouldn't quite work if there's multiple copies of the add-on. This ensures that even if they're different versions, so if in the future we release an incompatible version, they will have to do a little dance here to figure out. And that's why I have it already labeled V1, yes. Yep. But right now, thankfully, there's just the one.
That's great.
So
thank you.
Yeah. So we look up the active one and we tell it to analyze. And so analyze is going to take in a broccoli tree and give out a broccoli tree, and we don't rewrite any of the code. So the point of analyze is that it's a broccoli transform, which is normally a thing that takes in one folder full of files and gives you another folder full of files. And we actually just give you the same files. But along the way of seeing them, we get a chance to see all the imports go by. Right? So when I say see them go by, that's where it's kind of important that imports are static. We don't have to run the code to know what imports are in there. We can parse the code, right, using the same parser that is configured by, your app has a parser that Babel knows how to use based on the settings that you've set up for Babel. We use the same settings so that anything that is already able to build, we're able to parse, we could find all the imports. And that people who paid close attention earlier might realize that the dynamic one I mentioned before, you actually cannot necessarily find statically just by parsing, which is why we don't actually support every possible dynamic thing. So like we don't allow you to import like an expression that's not a string.
You can import anything?
You can't, well, I mean, in the spec you can, but we don't support that.
Sorry, you're saying
I'm saying you can't.
Open for it, not import a variable and a pass it.
I'm saying you can't.
You're saying literally the imports method must require a static string.
Yeah, I'm saying we can't do this, right?
Or any variable.
Right. Only a string literal. So like this will be like.
I can imagine the thing you literally wrote to be possible to do. You totally right there.
In the mode.
Don't do
that. Don't do that. Don't do that. Right. So it says we need a string literal argument because that's just because you can't because we don't run the code, right? We just look at what's possible. And so like this could be inside of an if, and we wouldn't necessarily know if you needed it, but we would be like, well, it might be needed, so we will know about it. So anyway, that's the analyzer. And so all the analyzer is really responsible for is, going back to where I was, is taking all your code and noticing what's in there, right? And then the last step here, what am I looking at? This is not all the steps. Oh yeah, I need to, right. Where's my pre-practice? Is this even the current version of the code? I'm so confused. Included. Okay, so this does the other work. So basically, this is a hook that just runs whenever this add-on gets added to the app, the included hook runs. And if we happen to be if our auto import happens to be the one that's primary, the one that's actually doing the work, it runs this other hook. And that's where we actually do a bunch of the magic and like basically start to look at those imports we found and try to find those modules. Right? We're going to look at your package JSON and say, is ND array actually in package JSON as a dependency? If it's not, we're not touching it. Maybe it's some other thing they're importing, right? If we can resolve it, then we'll go find that package on disk. And we'll say, okay, is it an Ember add-on? Because if it's an Ember add-on, it already has its own rules for how things get into the app, and we don't try to auto import it. But if it's not an Ember add-on, we're gonna get it into the app. And so we end up discovering all the things that need to be imported and the names they're imported as. And at the end of the day, we end up handing all of that data to Webpack. And so I mentioned that Webpack expects to get the main entry point to your application and just build it. So we effectively simulate an application for Webpack. And this is literally the code for that application. So this is a handlebars template that's generating JavaScript in the build process. And it's got this is a little bit of preamble that I'm going to elide over for now. There's some setup stuff. But mostly what we get is we are a module that defines a bunch of other modules by requiring them. And all of this code expands out to the main entry point that Webpack handles. And so when Webpack reads this code, it's going to see basically the connection between the existing Ember loader. I realize I'm starting to lose everybody. We're getting to the end. It's okay. Remember I said the most practical stuff would be in the beginning, and now we're off in La La Land? You don't need to know any of this stuff to use it. But it's interesting if you're curious about this stuff. If you look at how an Ember app gets built, I'm going to set some context to try to say more clearly what I was just starting to say. If you look at a file like vendor.js contains all the third-party JavaScript that gets built into your application. And most of the stuff you find is in terms of defines. Make it big again. Okay. Now this is using the AMD spec, asynchronous module definition, something like that. This is one of the many ways that, one of the many kind of community invented standards for how modules could work in JavaScript, since browsers don't have, up until even very recently, not really had any built-in concept of modules. So at the very beginning of this file, we use the library loader.js, which is this tiny little loader that implements basically two key functions, define and require. And define adds a module, and require finds that module. And so all these defines you see here, this is where stuff in your app turned into actual modules. So let's go find some, actually the previous one was kind of good, right? jQuery is a good example. So this is why you can import jQuery, because there's this little shim thing here that is defining jQuery as a module. And it turns out it just goes to the global, right? It's just making it so that you can say import jQuery without going to the global jQuery. Maybe that's not such an elegant example. Here's
These are all fabricated. Here's a real one.
Yeah, so here's some real ones. This is from an add-on, right? That's adding stuff for us. Here's stuff from Ember Data. If you import Ember Data Adder, this is where it's coming from, right? So this is how all the modules get defined. And the code for them actually gets inlined, right? So here's the actual implementation of that thing. So in a normal Ember build, we're taking all those imports, taking all the exports from your code and turning them into defines, right? That's the same define that I'm using here. This little bit of JavaScript is kind of mashed down to be small. So I made window be just W, and then I get window define. But this is the define function that we were just looking at before. That's the D, right? And then we're going to define something, which is the module specifier. That's the thing that your code tried to import, right? We said import ND array. So we're going to define ND array as return require blah. And this part is actually the module entry point. So this is actually the path on disk that we found ND array at, right? So we're gonna and this require is actually something that when we're gonna pass this code to Webpack, and Webpack is gonna see that require, and it's gonna follow the link and grab all of the things that ND array uses. Right? So Webpack's gonna actually take this thing and compile it into whatever Webpack does to get ND array and all of its stuff. And our define is going to then actually get a definition for that module that's based on the stuff that Webpack gave us. So this line is basically pulling together the two worlds: the existing Ember loader that runs in the browser that uses define, and this is the stuff that Webpack's going to parse on its side, and it's going to pull the two together. And we do a slightly different thing for the static ones and the dynamic ones. And it turns out it ends up being not that different. In this case, actually, it makes it clear that what Webpack sees is actually the import. The import parens, the dynamic import. Notice I couldn't use the static import here, which is the kind of logical thing you'd use because of the fact that it's inside of a function. It's not module scope. It turns out Webpack doesn't care. You don't have to use imports. You can use requires too. So that solved the problem neatly. And so that's it. So we basically synthesize this function and pass it off to Webpack, and Webpack builds this thing. And now that means there's code in my build, probably at the bottom.
That just gets written to a file, right?
Yeah, it gets written to a temp file, and then we pass that temp file to Webpack and say, build this thing for me. Right?
And then on rebuilds, the temp file just gets updated
if any of your imports have changed. Yeah, and it does we do a pretty good job of only doing that when imports have changed. And also Webpack itself is stateful. So if you change it, like by adding one new one, it'll remember all the other ones and it'll do its own incremental build thing. So here's like the output of Webpack in our build. It's got like this stuff with these comments in front of it. This is like the boilerplate that Webpack uses as its loader effectively. And then, which can minify in a production build better. And then we've got stuff, here's the actual thing where this is the main entry point for our application. And actually, so like this blob of nasty looking evaluable JavaScript is the output of that template we were looking at before. Except now, instead of saying require, it ends up being whatever Webpack compiled it to, like Webpack require, et cetera, et cetera.
Why is it eval?
Why is it eval? Basically because that was their way of not paying the parse cost on stuff that you aren't ready to run yet. And you can customize and turn that stuff off. But that is the default way it works, and I didn't mess with it. Yeah. So now you have gone through all 3 levels with me, like the practical how-to, the kind of second level of like the practical how-to of just statically import a thing, the dynamic import to do fancy code splitting, and the third level of like how does it work under the hood. So that's basically my talk. I guess I will end with kind of a hint of things to come. We're gonna rewrite all of Ember in Perl. No, but what I want to do is make more of Ember's build work this way, right? So right now, it's great for third-party stuff. Like any third-party library you want, you can get both statically and dynamically. And I want to get to the point where all your components and routes can also come this way, right? You want to be able to split your application into many pieces and dynamically load them. And so that involves bringing this kind of capability. Like this is basically a polyfill for what we want to be the default behavior throughout the build. And so I'm working on basically drafting up some ideas and spiking out implementations, stuff that I don't want to show till I can prove it works, because there's a lot of, all of this stuff has to actually like bring the add-on ecosystem along. The add-on ecosystem is such a powerful strength of Ember. All existing apps use lots of add-ons. That's a good thing. So I want to get to the point though where we can pre-compile all your add-ons into modules that a standard JavaScript understanding tool, whether that's Webpack, Rollup, Parcel.js, whatever, can understand. And actually, I'm getting pretty close on my spike. I'm excited about it. Once I have something working, I would definitely like to share it more. But what it's going to come down to is think about the idea of trying to spec out and separate the difference between authoring formats for your code and sharing/publication formats for your code. Right. So if you think about all the add-ons you use, your builds today, when you bring those add-ons into your app, are extremely dynamic. Add-ons can do a lot of stuff that right at the time when you build your application, the add-ons do a lot of dynamic stuff. I think a lot of that work can get pushed back to the time the add-on itself is published. We can use a lot of standard vanilla JavaScript features to do the things that today we do very dynamically, whether that is like dead code elimination instead of Broccoli build customization to add a file here or take a file out there, or whether that is like making sure that all of the JavaScript is already just ES latest, and all of the handlebars already has any weird custom ASC transforms applied, so that there's a spec thing that goes in the package. And once you do that, it turns out that is actually the hard thing about making Ember's builds better. It's bringing the add-on ecosystem along. It's trying to write a new spec to standardize them. So that's the kind of work I'd like to do next.
Quick question.
Sure.
I think you made a small mistake. You had said there were 3 steps in Webpack config, but I thought there were 7 layers as well.
There's a lot more than 3 parts of Webpack config. There's 3 points of my talk. Yeah. My talk is heaven and not hell.
That didn't work as good for my joke.
Okay. Yeah. Cool. Any other questions? Yes.
Yeah, so ND array right now is represented by that chunk file that you download, but normally it ends up in vendor or like.
Oh yeah,
there's a
so
shim for it?
yeah, so if in the first version we did where it was statically imported, it's in vendor. Yeah, and now it is in. That's right, because when we were inspecting that code, that's right. I wasn't even thinking, but when we inspected the code, it wasn't there, right? Because it's not in vendor, because we moved it out into the chunk. And so yes, it's so right now all that's in vendor is like the loader code that Webpack uses to find all its chunks.
So do you get like a file per dynamically imported module?
Yes. So you would get now Webpack itself has a lot of options to customize how things split. Not exposing those by default. For the most part, when you dynamically import things, we like assume you want that thing, and for the most part that works fine. There are some more advanced cases where you might really want like if there's like 4 different things you dynamically import, and all of those in turn depend on some other thing. It's kind of nice to split that into a common chunk. And so I'm actually using by default the newest Webpack has a fairly automatic and aggressive splitting capability that is just turned on as the default thing, and that's what we're using. And it even does like, even for the stuff that is static, it will do splitting because of like stuff that comes from node modules versus stuff that is your own will actually split in the same way that Ember apps split app and vendor, and for the same reason, because you might get better cacheability on the third-party stuff. So like it actually does a lot of that stuff. It turns out in our static case, it doesn't matter that much because we put all of the static things into your vendor file anyway. You know, like a kind of next level thing, if we were to get more intrusive on the build process and take over more of it, would be to actually rewrite the HTML and actually have like 2 or 3 entry points instead of 1. And when you only have one index.js, that's not so interesting and maybe even slightly detrimental. But if you actually start making an entry point per route, now it's kind of cool that some of those are shared and some of them are not. And so when somebody moves to the new entry point, the ones that were cached are cached and the ones that are new are new, right? So like that kind of stuff's all kind of turned on by default. So we get some sane heuristics on splitting out of the box. Yeah. Yes.
I'm wondering how, like your vision that you're working on, the spike you're working on and everything, how does that compare to maybe what's happening in back or Angular these days?
Sure.
I don't know what they're
Sure,
doing.
yeah. I mean, it really aligns us with what's going on there, right? So, I mean, for the most part, the most popular tool is probably still Webpack in those worlds. Well, Angular has their own weird CLI. I don't know what Angular does. In React, it's definitely still Webpack is the most popular. And there's others that people like Parcel's new and popular and hyped, and that's another interesting one. Plenty of people still use Rollup too, and that's a good one. I deliberately do not want us to be wedded to one. Part of the point of writing a spec is, so when I talk about this problem, when I've talked about this problem with folks, and I talked about like the first step is actually writing a new spec that says what is it, everything that an Ember add-on is allowed to do. It's not always obvious to people how that connects to the problem of making Ember's builds cooler and do cooler things, because like, well, you're just talking about add-ons, but like, what about all the rest? But my point is that add-ons are the whole shebang. Everything's an add-on. Your app is just a really simple kind of add-on, and add-ons are the hard case because that's what has to be something you can like ship to the world, and it's got to keep working. Right? Like, so having a spec that is very, very aligned with JavaScript semantics, and that is actually a spec and not just implementation defined for what an add-on can do, is something we don't really have. Like we just developed the concepts as we needed them, and now it's a good time to go back, rationalize, glimmerize effectively, and say like, okay, what is it, all the things they can do? How do we align those things with all the features that JavaScript now has that didn't exist when we started, and use those features? So for example, you know, Ember auto import is a replacement for app.import, and today in an add-on, you can obviously use Ember auto import in an add-on, and that's fine. But like every add-on should just import the things it wants. App.import it's an old way to do something that JavaScript now has. Like that's just how the world expects things to be, right? So, and there's lots of other features like that where, like for example, lazy engines is an area where when that was implemented, there's a ton of custom code to make lazy engines build lazily. But you can express all of that as just a separate HTML file and or static dynamic imports. And then without teaching without having to teach Webpack, Rollup, Parcel, anything about Ember, anything about Ember engines, anything about lazy engines, it would all just work. You could build an Ember app with those tools, right? By aligning it with the JavaScript semantics. So that's the direction I want to take it. And it is very much about aligning with wider JavaScript. We were very early adopters of ECMA modules and all that stuff, but so early that like Ember's own experience with how modules work actually fed back into the spec. Like we were the first people using them before they were really finalized. Now the world has had a chance to like use them and build tools around them, and we need to actually adopt those stuff, a lot of that stuff. Yes, Dan.
What one of the things I remember being painful about Ember Browser 5 was that the cost of doing the analysis to figure out what imports even needed to happen was pretty high.
Mm-hmm.
How does that compare in auto import?
Sure. So the well, it's definitely favorable compared to Ember Browser Fi. If you're using Ember Browser Fi, this is a strict improvement, and it's faster both incrementally and for cold builds.
It doesn't require the prefix, right?
Correct. Yeah, there was a special prefix we put on in that case too. So it's already definitely faster. There is a cost. I think it's quite reasonable. You should try it out in apps and report back, especially if you got bigger apps. That's really the only way for us to say precisely. There are some. I don't think the parse cost is that bad, really. And there are some opportunities to make it better. So something we could do with a little more effort across several different projects in the community would be today, when the build ultimately calls out to Babel and transpiles your code, right? Babel obviously parses it. So you already always pay that parse cost. We don't really ship, and maybe Robert would know better than me, but I don't think we ship enough metadata along at that point that the Babel plugin itself has enough context for me to use it as my analysis phase. But I think that would totally be possible to do. At which point,
what context do you need?
I need to know like the actual file on disk I've got.
Wow.
Like absolutely. No, that I have not an absolute one. Because it's relative, because it's a broccoli tree and it's relative to the root of the broccoli tree.
How do you get to ever that? You'll never get a non-broccoli tree.
That's what I'm saying. Well, I'm saying you can manually pass more data around. Like when you run broccoli Babel, whatever, you could pass in options to say like I'm dealing with this. I got this from this npm package at this place. Like it just has to align to actual structure in npm land, right? If we did that, we could actually do the analysis as a side effect of the Babel parse you're already getting, and that would be great. Then there would be no extra parse, right?
It's tricky with the caching.
Correct. But on the other hand, like if everything updates correctly because you edited some code and it needs to get out the other end, it's got to go through that parser somewhere. So
the caching should be fine. Also, I don't see how you don't have information.
Okay, well maybe we could find a way to do that.
Babel is being done per layer, so you know the add-on root that you're currently transpiling, and you know the relative path.
So maybe we can make that work without too much work. Yeah, that would be
also
nice.
The cross restart caching has the ability to include metadata, arbitrary metadata.
So that we could put it in the things we found last time.
Yes.
So yeah, so it sounds like, especially because of the caching, the parallelization and stuff that I wasn't even aware of, that I should definitely talk to the few folks who know how that works. But we should be able to push the cost down. I think it's not bad already. I really do.
Is there
We
any
should try to.
cross restart caching now?
No, I don't have cross restart caching. Yes, Dan.
Yeah. What do you think about the possibilities of tree shaking, dynamic imports, given the approach you've taken, where there's more of a static string used for the dynamic imports? It seems to me that would actually be possible taking that approach versus a dynamically evaluated dynamic import.
Yeah. So I mean, tree shaking, which really is just is like leaving out the code you don't need, right? And sometimes people insert, there's kind of two different levels of what people think about when they say that. One is leaving out whole modules that don't get used. And one is actually stripping out individual like exports from a file that don't get used. And the files one is actually quite easy, and it already works in the sense that if you Lodash, for example, exposes per function exports. Like you can, instead of importing capitalize from Lodash, you can import capitalize from Lodash/capitalize, and that's like a special module that has only that. And that actually loads only what you need. Like today in Ember Auto Import, it shakes out all the rest of Lodash because it's all done at a per file level, right, per module level. So that all works already, and that's nice. And to the extent that we move more of the Ember build into this kind of world, you just get that. It just works. And so like perfect candidates for this are stuff like a library like Ember Animated, right? You actually import the motions and transitions that you want as actual ECMA imports. So ones that you don't use don't have to come in. That should just be a thing. It's not a thing right now because we don't deal with Ember add-ons because they have their own rules for builds. But as we take over more of the build this way, you get that level of tree shaking just as easy. The harder one is shaking out actual exports from files that don't get used. Like if a file exports 3 functions and you only use one of them, can you leave out the other 2? The answer in the most general case is you can't be sure of that unless the modules themselves certify that nothing has side effects. So like Webpack has a spec for that, and it seems popular enough that maybe other people are going to use it too, that in package JSON of a module, you can actually declare that your exports don't have side effects. They're side effect free. And in that case, it actually does shake out individual functions from module. And again, if those were re-exports to whole files and whole trees of files, those would all drop out too. So that's a thing. Although it is also probably only a thing for the static side. You were asking about the dynamic side. I think in that case, I would expect it to basically always only be file level because it's just like knowing which, because you end up handing a object back to arbitrary code that's going to do something with it. Right? You could stash it away and then far later in the program try to pull some of the exports off of it. You can't see which exports are used, so you would just get them all. So that said, though, like with dynamic exports, the shaking thing is almost less interesting and important because if you never run that branch, you never load that code, you never pay any costs for it. So like it's already split out if it's a dynamic import, right? Yeah.
So I would like to stop questions there, if that's all right.
Sure, yeah.
So everyone, let's thank Ed for his time. So it's getting a little bit late, so what I want to do is I'm just going to go through some of our closing announcements, and then if you had a question you wanted to ask the group, what I suggest is stand up, ask it, and then those who have some input or advice, come up and let's chat. So in closing, I mentioned before that it takes a lot of people to make this meetup happen. So I'd like to thank our speakers tonight, Keith and Dan, who help with logistics and pizza and all that jazz, everybody at Salsify who comes here, and also Ed, who poked me when I hadn't scheduled a meetup yet and actually helped with some of the logistics at a time when I didn't really have the energy to reach out and line those up myself. So in light of Tom's suggestion of like ask for help at the bottom of all of his slides, I could use some help from 1 or 2 more people who can do things like post announcements on Twitter, or if you want to try doing this part of the meetup, maybe like this is the safest space you're ever going to find for practicing your public speaking skills, is this awesome group of people here. So if you want to try this out, if you want to help with something behind the scenes, it's kind of nice to have somebody else to like learn and work with. And that would really help me a lot in keeping this meetup going if I'm like sick or tired or something, that it keeps rolling. So thank you, Ed, for doing that. And if that is at all like, making you think a little bit, if you want to come talk to me afterwards, that would be awesome. That's my question and request, is like, who has a little bit of time and energy and desire to help out and learn some stuff with me? So if you have a question to pose to the group, let's do that now. So ask a question, and then I'll kind of like mix up. Did anyone had something you wanted to ask?
Yeah. Need some help seeing if the devise I'm getting a 4.6. Well, made a wrong format. I'm not sure what format it wants is.
And the back end is what on that?
Rails.
Rails. Okay. So 406 on Rails.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Any other announcements? For those of you who want to join us, sometimes we go for drinks and things after, and we'll figure out what that is. Probably Carry Nation. That's like so nice. We can just walk there. It's across the street, and they always room. So if you want to stick around, feel free. Otherwise, thank you very much for coming, and we'll see you next time.